His Tinder profile said he was 45, but he looked to be in his early 30s at most. Looking for a sugar baby. $700 weekly. No sex. It sounded too good to be true, but as a broke university student, I was willing to take my chances. I swiped right and Tinder let me know it was a match. His message came seconds later. "Hey there, sweetheart." I cringed at that word. I hated it, but $700 was $700, so I sucked it up and replied, "Hey." His name was Jack, and he told me he owned his own business, although he never specified what kind of business it was. We talked for a while before he asked me for my Venmo to send me the first payment. After a few minutes, I got the notification. I stared at the $700 for at least 20 minutes, expecting to wake up from a dream at any second. But it wasn't a dream. "You still there?" I clicked on the message. "Yeah. Sorry. If you don't mind me asking, what are you looking for in return?" I stared at the chat until he replied, "I'm just looking for you to do a few favors for me." That sounded like it was going to be sexual to me. Like what? For example, the first thing I need you to do is pick up a delivery for me. That sounded innocent enough, but I was still expecting there to be some kind of twist. $700 to pick up a package? Come on, even I wasn't that naive. From the post office or something? No. I'll send you the address, but I'd rather not do this through Tinder. You got Kick, or you can give me your number. Kick? What was this? 2011. I decided to give him my number instead, and he texted me the address immediately, followed by the address to his house, where I would have to drop off the package. I'm not home right now, but there's a key on the bottom of the blue flower pot near the door. Go inside and put the package on the coffee table in the living room. Make sure that you lock the door when you go inside the house, and then lock it again when you leave. I grabbed my car keys and wallet and got into my car, putting the address into Google Maps. Got it. On my way. My phone buzzed as I backed out of my driveway. I'm serious. Lock the door both times. Please. I thought that was a little excessive, but I promised him that I would. The house looked abandoned. It had a broken chain link fence around it, with a small door that was hanging on to dear life. It stuck out like a sore thumb, surrounded by houses that were a lot nicer than this one in comparison. You here for Jack's shit? I looked up to see a man standing in the open doorway of the house. He took up almost the entire space, his head skimming the top of the door frame. He was huge, in height and muscles, and his entire torso was covered in tattoos. Yeah, I guess, I replied, not moving from my spot on the sidewalk. Stay right there, he said. I did. I actually don't think I would have moved if he had asked me to. I looked around and realized that there was no one else on this street. I was a 21-year-old woman alone in the street. I gripped my car keys. A few minutes later, the man came back out carrying a cardboard box. It was about the size of a shoebox, but stained and damp on some of the corners. Can you open your car? He asked. I opened the trunk, not wanting that inside on my car seats, and he put it in. All right, there you go, he said. Thanks, I replied. I walked around to the driver's side of the car and opened the door. Oh, and one more thing, he said. I looked at him. Watch out. I didn't reply. I blasted my music as I drove to Jack's house, hoping it would drown out my anxiety. It didn't. I parked my car in the stone driveway and stayed inside the car, admiring the house. It was a huge house, with stone pillars on the front porch and the greenest grass I had ever seen in my life. I turned the car off and got out. I grabbed the package and walked to the front door, getting the key from where he said it would be. I opened the door and stepped in, closing it behind me. I thought about what he had said about locking the door when I got inside. I thought that was a little overboard, but as I stared at the closed door, something made me reach out and lock it. I walked inside, my feet cushioned by the thick maroon carpet, and admired the inside of the house. All the furniture was wooden and looked incredibly expensive. I would probably finish school a dozen times with the money that it took to furnish this place. I set the package down on the coffee table, and as I walked back to the door, I heard a phone ringing from somewhere inside the house. I froze. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. I took it out to look. Don't answer any calls that aren't from Marvin. I put my phone back and followed the sound of the phone, poking my head into a few different rooms before I found it in an office. I walked over to the desk and looked at the caller ID. Incoming call from Jack. That was odd. I grabbed my phone to look at the message again. I was starting to get a little bit creeped out and decided I wouldn't answer just to be safe, and left the house, remembering to lock the door as I left. I've done a few more favors for Jack since then. I drove a BMW to a random park in another city, only to get out and drive a different car back to Jack's house. He had me meet one of his employees at lunch, who then gave me a briefcase to deliver to the first house I'd gone to and told me he would know if I looked inside. On several occasions, he asked me to drive down to that same house and stay with the guy, whose name was Julio, for a certain amount of time. In total, I've made around $3,500. Most recently, Jack asked me to stay in his house overnight. I woke up to a text message from him. I need you to spend the night at my house. I hadn't ever seen him in person, but I had talked to him on the phone a few times. He proceeded to tell me he would pay me $1,000 to spend the night at his house, provided that I followed a few rules. I drove to his house that evening. The driveway was empty, and it normally was, but the porch light was on. I walked up, unlocked the door, went inside, and then locked it again. Everything in the house looked the same. Jack had told me over the phone that he would leave the list of rules on the dining room table. I set all my stuff down in the living room. My bags looked like garbage compared to the fancy furniture in there. I wandered into the kitchen and then to the dining room. Sure enough, there was a piece of paper on the wooden table, held down by an empty glass. Lock the door when you come in. Only answer calls from Marvin. Don't turn on any faucets between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. Don't open the door for anyone, no matter who they say they are, after 10 p.m. If the door to the closet at the end of the hall is open, sleep in the library. If closed, sleep in any of the bedrooms. The gardener comes at midnight. If he starts knocking on the windows, hide. Turn the TV on and let it play on static through the night. Do not forget to do this. Help yourself to anything in the fridge. I'll pay you in the morning. Good night. I made sure to follow all the rules. To be honest, I was regretting my decision. But seeing as I was already here and I was getting paid, I decided to stay anyway. I figured as long as I followed all the rules, I'd be perfectly fine. Still, it felt a little odd. What was this? A haunted house? Nevertheless, I lounged around the house for a few hours, as I was planning on going to sleep around 9, since that's the time that all the weird shit would begin to happen. At 8:50, I brushed my teeth, using the faucet for the last time before 9. I checked the closet in the hallway, and upon seeing that it was open, I moved my stuff into the library and got ready to sleep on the couch. I locked the doors just in case and laid on the couch, scrolling through my phone. I hadn't gotten any more messages from Jack, and I started to think up scenarios and reasons as to why he had such strict, peculiar sets of rules in his house. I had dozed off at some point because at exactly 10:16 p.m. I was woken up by the doorbell ringing. I was about to get up to check, but then I remembered the rule: don't open the door for anyone, no matter who they say they are, after 10 p.m. I stayed on the couch trying not to move, paranoid that they would hear even the slightest sound. "It's the police! Open up!" I didn't move. "Hello? It's the police! Open up or we're coming in." I still didn't move, but I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. There was silence for a while after that. Then the doorbell rang again. "Hey, it's Jack. Let me in." It sounded like Jack, but still, I didn't get up. He would have a key, wouldn't he? Why would he need me to let him in? This continued for almost a full hour. Different people would ring the doorbell, announce themselves, and then disappear when I didn't respond. I was finally able to fall asleep, and the gardener never came. When I woke up the next morning, I heard someone in the kitchen. I got up slowly and unlocked the door as quietly as possible, taking my phone with me and walking across the living room and into the kitchen. I stopped at the entrance and peered in. It was Jack. He was standing in front of the stove, stirring something as the coffee machine brewed coffee on the counter behind him. "Hey, good morning," he said when he saw me. "Hi," I replied, nervous. I hadn't seen him in person before, but he looked exactly like his pictures online. "Scrambled eggs?" he asked, motioning to the pan with a wooden spoon. "Yeah, thanks," I replied, walking over to take the plate from him. I ate my breakfast and drank some coffee in silence. "So how was it?" he asked. "It was okay. Nothing super freaky happened," I replied. "Cool," he replied. There was an awkwardness in the room. "I think I'm gonna go now. I have class." I trailed off. I didn't. But I really wanted to get out of there. "Oh no, yeah, sure. I'll talk to you some other time," he replied. I grabbed my stuff and he walked me to my car. I could see him standing in the driveway, staring at me as I left. When I got home, I unpacked all my stuff and noticed that I still had the list with me. I sat on my bed and read it again. I felt my body tense up as I realized that I had forgotten something. Turned the TV on and let it play on static through the night. "Do not forget to do this. Do not forget to do this." I stared at the words on the page until they lost meaning. Beside me, my phone buzzed, snapping me back to reality. It was the $1,000 payment. I looked at my phone and then back at the list. Maybe it wasn't an important step. As I was thinking this over, a text from Jack came in. "I'm not in town right now. I should be back next week, so you're free from running any more errands for me until then. Just sent the payment. Go do something fun." I stared at the message and read it again, and once more for good measure. "I'm not in town right now." I thought back to this morning and how Jack was in his house, how he gave me breakfast. "I'm not in town right now." Within minutes, a new text came in, this time from a number that I didn't recognize. "Did you forget to do something?" The text was followed by a picture of Jack, or whoever this version of Jack was, standing in front of the TV. I didn't respond. Next came another picture. This one was of the outside of my house. It was followed by another text. "Watch out." I didn't leave my house for almost an entire week. The only reason I didn't stay indoors for longer is that I had an important exam in one of my classes that I absolutely had to be present for. That also didn't help with the anxiety I was feeling. As I drove to campus, I kept my eyes glued to my surroundings, almost running 2 stop signs and a red light. I kept expecting Jack, or fake Jack I suppose, to pop out randomly on the side of the road, or in the car next to me, or the car behind me. I constantly glanced at my rearview mirror, trying to figure out if the black truck behind me had been there this whole time, or if it was different than the one I had seen 10 minutes ago. I hadn't told him where I went to school, so maybe he wouldn't know. Then again, I hadn't told him where I lived either, and he seemed to figure that one out rather quickly. I hadn't texted the real Jack since the incident had happened. I didn't even know what I was supposed to say. "Oops, I didn't follow all your rules, and now there's a weird look-alike of yours running around the city." My plan, as foolish as it was to act as if all was well. I wasn't going to stir the pot by telling him I had already messed up, so instead, I was going to wait until he realized that something was wrong. Hopefully, he wouldn't. I will admit that not telling him was more difficult than I had thought, and I found myself constantly checking my phone for texts from Jack, but none appeared. I finished my exam that day, sure that I had failed due to my lack of focus, and drove back home where I found Julio standing in my driveway. He was looking down at his phone, and I attempted to keep driving down the street before he saw me, but I wasn't fast enough. He glanced and began walking towards my car as I slowly pulled into the driveway, locking my doors and trying to remain calm. Instead of shifting into park, I kept my foot on the brake and shifted into reverse, fully ready in case I needed to make a quick getaway. I sat in the driver's seat looking forward at my front door. I wondered for a second if I would be able to get inside and lock the door before Julio got to me. Suddenly, he leaned down and knocked on the window, making me jump. I turned to look at him and said nothing. "Roll your window down," he said, motioning for me to lower the window. I pressed the button for a split second, making only a tiny crack of open space. "You know, it's not me you should be afraid of." I looked at him and glanced at my rearview mirrors, trying to see if any of my neighbors were outside, but they weren't, and I was alone with no witnesses. "You messed it up," he said, leaning against my car. "I told you to watch out, and you didn't. You managed to mess up the rules in one night. They always miss at least one." "They?" I looked up at him but said nothing because I honestly had no clue what to say. "Get out of the car. We're going inside." He tapped his hand on the roof of my car and walked towards my front door. I thought about driving away, but I wasn't sure where I would go, and a part of me wanted to hear him out. So I found myself parking the car, turning off the engine, and letting Julio into my house. He took a seat on my couch and glanced around my living room. "This is fancy for a college student. You buy this with Jack's money?" he asked. I rolled my eyes as I stood in front of him. "Why did you want to come in?" "All right. Touchy subject," he said, shrugging. "I need to talk to you about Jack." "Which Jack? The one I've been talking to or the one who appeared in the house?" "What?" he snapped, leaning over and resting his elbows on his knees. "What?" "What do you mean? The one who appeared in the house. Jack isn't back yet. I came here to tell you that you forgot to lock the door after your little house-sitting gig, which Jack won't be pleased about. He's very particular about his stuff. He's gotten rid of girls for much pettier shit than this." I said nothing and stared at Julio while he stared back, waiting for me to explain myself. His use of the words "gotten rid of" made me nervous, and I wondered what he meant by that. Surely he wouldn't kill me over a mistake, right? "Was there someone else in the house?" he asked after a few seconds of silence. Jack. Jack was in the house that morning before I left." "How do you suppose that happened? Because Jack hasn't come back from his trip yet." I shrugged, not really knowing what to say. Julio stood up, sighing in annoyance. "Fine, you know what? I originally came over here to ask you for a share of the cash you got for your poor house-sitting job, but it seems to me that you probably messed up more than I originally thought, so I'm just going to stay out of whatever this is. Good luck." He walked over and opened my front door, waving to me as he left, leaving me standing in my empty house. I ran to the door and locked it as soon as he was gone and started to freak out once again. I thought about what I was going to do if Jack came back from his trip and found out that I had messed up. What if Julio was right and someone had broken into the house and robbed him? Maybe I just thought I saw Jack, but maybe it was just some other stranger who looked like him. My mind was going a mile a minute as I tried to figure out what to do. I paced around my house for a few hours before I finally decided that I was going to drive back to Jack's house and make sure that no one had broken in. If they had, I would simply make an anonymous police report or something. Besides, the only way he would ever know that it was my fault would be if Julio snitched on me, which it didn't seem like he was planning on doing anymore. I made the drive over in silence, trying to control my breathing so that I didn't have a meltdown on the highway. I finally pulled into the driveway and turned the engine off, but I couldn't work up the courage to get out of the car. I sat there for a few minutes, staring at the giant house, trying to force myself to unbuckle my seatbelt, open the door, and get out of the car. The house, which once looked impressive, now made me feel anxious and out of place. I couldn't stop myself from imagining all sorts of horrible scenarios that I could stumble upon once I opened the door. I thought about how many possible hiding places there were in a house that large. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally decided to get out of the car and walk towards the front door. I hesitated for a few seconds before taking a deep breath and pushing the door open. Only it didn't open because it was locked. I assumed that Julio had probably locked it and looked for the key on my keychain. I unlocked the door and stepped into the living room, taking a look around. Everything looked normal enough. There were no signs of breaking and entering or anything like that, and I was glad that Julio had come over and realized my mistake before someone else had. I closed the door behind me, this time double-checking that I locked it, and began to make my way further into the house. I went into the library first, which looked the same as it had when I left it. Next, I made my way through the living room, glancing around to see if anything was out of place, but nothing was. I was starting to feel better now that I had confirmed that no one had broken in and ruined the place. That feeling was short-lived, however, when I walked into the kitchen. It was a complete mess. Both the fridge and the freezer were wide open, all the containers of food emptied out. There were empty boxes of frozen foods tossed inside the freezer and on the kitchen floor. There were a few trays of meat that were laying out on the table and the counters, and some of the red juice from the meats had been spilled inside the fridge and now dripped down onto the floor. I noticed that while there hadn't been much food in there in the first place, it was all gone. As I got closer to the fridge, I realized that it wasn't cool, and the light inside the fridge wasn't working either. I assumed that whoever ate all the food also unplugged it for some odd reason. I stepped over an empty carton of orange juice and an empty crate of eggs as I made my way towards the stove, where I found stacks of unwashed pans. One of them was still hot, meaning that it was only recently taken off the burner. There were eggshells all over the counter, and I thought back to that morning when Jack, or whoever that was, had made me eggs for breakfast. I walked back out of the kitchen, careful not to step on the mess that littered the floor, and made my way down the hallway. I spotted the door at the end of the hall, and this time it was closed. As I continued to walk down the hall, I couldn't help but notice how eerily quiet it was in the house. I couldn't even hear the sound of the heater running. As I passed the thermostat in the hallway, I saw that it wasn't working. The screen was off and there was nothing on it, like it had been turned off or something. I leaned forward and pressed a few of the buttons, but none of them worked. I poked my head into the study, but that was also empty, although I did see that the landline had been used recently, and whoever used it didn't put it back. The handheld part was hanging off the side of the desk, and I stepped in, grabbing the phone and holding it up to my ear, but there was only silence. I put it back and followed the cord with my eyes. It was connected to the wall, but it seemed like there was no power in the house, which explained the refrigerator and the thermostat. I walked out of the study and headed down the hall again, but I froze in my tracks when I noticed that the door at the end of the hall was open now. Someone was in the house. I reached into my back pocket and grabbed my phone, checking to see if maybe I had missed a text from Jack, but I had no signal inside the house. I held my phone in my hand anyway, hoping I'd pick up enough signal to call for help, and began to back away from the door, listening carefully for any footsteps or noises that would let me know where the intruder was. As I spun around, I found myself face to face with Jack, or whoever it was that I was looking at. I knew he was the same man I had seen that morning, but I had no idea who he really was. "Sorry," I said, startled. "Which one are you?" he asked, squinting at me. He was dressed in a stained gray t-shirt and old pajama bottoms that looked like they had been purchased 30 years ago. "What?" I asked. "You're the new one, right? The one from the other day? You're the one who forgot to turn the television on." "Yeah, I'm so sorry. I thought I was being careful. I didn't mean to." I stopped talking as he started laughing. "Sorry?" he asked, grinning. "I should be thanking you." "Who are you?" I asked him. I stared at his face, and he looked exactly like Jack, but I couldn't figure out why he was here when he said he was still on his trip. "I'm Jack." He replied as if he were stating the obvious. But Jack said he wouldn't be back for a few days. His expression changed, and he narrowed his eyes at me. Did he tell you when he would be back? The exact date? I shook my head, confused, and thinking about how I was going to get past this man and get out of this damn house. But you can ask him, right? I don't know, he hasn't contacted me in a few days. Damn it, I was hoping it wouldn't be that bad. Can you explain to me what the hell is going on? I asked him. You shouldn't have come back here. Something felt off to me, and chills shook my entire body. Part of me regretted not going with my original plan of acting like everything was okay. I didn't want to stay in the house any longer, and there was really nothing that I could do anyway. Besides, I was getting a bad feeling from this guy claiming to be Jack. I slowly stepped past him, glancing back behind me as I continued to walk into the living room and towards the front door. I found myself walking faster and faster until I was basically running and throwing myself at the front door. I couldn't help but shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen if I stayed in this house any longer. I unlocked the door, but just as I was about to open it, I heard the lock slide back into place. Only it sounded a lot louder than usual. I jiggled the doorknob and realized that while the doorknob wasn't locked, something else was, and it was keeping me from opening the door. I began to freak out as I pulled on the door urgently, trying to get it to open, but something was keeping it shut. "What the fuck?" I said out loud. I glanced towards the hall as I heard another noise, but I quickly realized that it was the sound of air flowing through the vents. It seemed like the power was back, and somehow, some sort of security system had activated at the same time. I looked down at my phone, and not only did I have a signal now, but I also had 3 messages from Jack. "I'm back. What happened? I know you're in the house." I looked around the room, trying to find him or any security cameras in the room that would be alerting him of my presence in the house. I didn't see any and grabbed my phone to text him back. "Are you here?" I held my phone in my hands as I made my way back towards the hallway to find the other Jack that I had seen earlier, if he even was another Jack. Maybe this was all the same person and he was just messing with me for some reason. A part of me thought that perhaps I deserved all of this for doing all of this in the first place. I mean, why was I so quick to agree to run random errands for a random man that I had never met? Sure, I needed the money, but going into a stranger's house has got to be on the list of the top 10 dumbest things you could ever do. Especially considering the fact that no one knew where I was, and I didn't have a weapon to defend myself if I needed to. I stood in front of the closed door for a second before making my way over to a window. I tried to open it, but the security system had locked the windows shut as well. I thought about breaking the window open, and I grabbed a sturdy-looking vase. I took a few steps back and then threw it at the window as hard as I could. The vase shattered as it made contact with the window glass, but the window was fine, unscratched. The only way I was getting out of here was through the door, but first I had to disarm the security system somehow. I walked back to where I had left Jack, but he was gone and nowhere to be found. "Jack?" I called, my voice echoing throughout the house. The door at the end of the hall was closed once again, and I began to walk towards it, peeking into each room as I passed it, but there was no one else in the house. As I reached the door, my phone buzzed in my hand. "You were supposed to follow the rules." I stood in front of the door, trying to work up the courage to open it and see what was in the room. "I know. I'm sorry." I came back to make sure everything was okay. I reached out and grabbed the doorknob, taking deep breaths. The buzzing in my hand startled me, and I ignored it as I turned the doorknob and pulled the door open. I stood in the threshold at the top of a wooden staircase. Below it was a badly lit basement. I slowly walked down the stairs, glancing at my phone. "You should have stayed away. You're really going to regret this." I didn't reply and kept walking until I was at the bottom of the stairs. While I wasn't sure what I was expecting, it wasn't the normal-looking basement apartment that I had stumbled into. I found Jack sitting on the couch against one of the walls. He was reading a magazine and glanced up when he heard me step off the stairs. "What are you doing?" He shot to his feet as he shouted at me. "The door is locked. I can't get out," I replied. "You're so damn stupid," he exclaimed, walking over to me. "That's rude. How was I supposed to know the doors would lock when the power came back on?" "You weren't supposed to come back," he shouted, his face turning an angry shade of red as he yelled. "I wanted to make sure everything was fine," I replied. "Who cares? You got $1,000 for house sitting. Why didn't you take it and leave? Why are you so angry? Why are you even here? You're clearly not Jack," I snapped, annoyed. "How do you know?" he asked in a calmer tone. "What? How do you know I'm not Jack? I look like the pictures you've seen, don't I?" "Yeah, but Jack is on vacation," I replied. "How do you know?" he repeated. "What are you talking about? Have you ever met Jack in person? Have you ever talked to him on the phone, video call, anything other than a text message every few days?" I didn't reply, staring at him. He was right. He did look exactly like the photos I had seen on the Tinder profile. That's what I thought. He replied to my silence. "What are you saying exactly?" I asked as I heard my phone buzz once again. "How do you know that the person you've been talking to is a real person? As a matter of fact, how do you know that it's not me? Maybe this was my plan all along to lure you here." At that point, it finally hit me. He was right. I didn't know if I was talking to a real person, all that I was doing random favors for someone with an internet profile who wanted to pay me money to do these things for some reason. I guess I had always felt that there was something off about a sugar daddy who was willing to pay someone to do things other than having sex with them, but I needed money too badly to spend too much time questioning it. I was feeling even more scared now, and my palms were cold and sweaty as I stood there, waiting for him to do something. I could run back upstairs, but I didn't think I was fast enough to get out of there and find something to jam the door and keep him downstairs. I took a shaky, deep breath as I tried my hardest not to make it seem like I was scared. If Jack was dangerous, I didn't want to alert him of my plans to try and run. After a few seconds of silence, I glanced down at my phone to read the most recent text, but there were no new notifications. "That wasn't your phone," Jack said, breaking the silence. I looked up at him and glanced at the phone sitting on a nearby table. Suddenly, he jumped towards me and I attempted to jump out of the way, but I was too slow. I saw Jack grab my arms and my phone fell out of my hands, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was on the living room couch and Jack was standing above me looking down. "What happened?" I asked. I attempted to sit up, but I noticed that I was incredibly dizzy and my left arm felt sore when I tried to prop myself up. I remembered Jack grabbing me earlier, and I figured he had gripped my arm too tight and must have bruised it in the process. "You're finally up. Good," he said. I slowly managed to sit up, wincing as I put weight on my left arm. I looked up at Jack, who was now standing a few feet away with a bandage wrapped around his right bicep. "What happened?" I asked, looking at the bandage, noticing that there was blood seeping through. "You really shouldn't have come back." I tried to shift my position on the couch and winced in pain as I put weight on my left arm again. I turned to look at it, trying to see if I had injured it somehow, and noticed that it was also wrapped in a bandage similar to Jack's. "What happened?" I repeated. Looked down at my arm. I slowly reached over and started to unwrap the bandage until it came off and I was left staring at crudely done stitches on the inside of my bicep. "What is this?" I snapped, looking at Jack. "Sorry, Ivy, but you really shouldn't have come back. Although, I'm kind of glad you did. I didn't really want to do this, but I need to get out of here." He began to back away from me, heading towards the front door. I watched as he easily opened it and wondered how he disabled the lock and if he had been the one to activate it in the first place. He stepped out of the door and turned back to look at me. "Good luck. I helped you out a bit while you were out," he said, motioning towards my phone, which he had set down on the couch next to me. I stood up and went after him. Surprisingly, he didn't try to run or back up and simply stood about a foot away from the front door, watching me. As I attempted to step outside, a stabbing pain erupted in my left arm, traveling throughout the rest of my body until I felt like I was being stabbed everywhere at once. I fell to the floor, crying out in pain. Once I was back in the house, the pain went away and I laid on the floor, shaking in the aftermath as I stared up at Jack. "What did you do to me?" I asked. "I had to get out. It's been 8 months. I'm sorry. You were just the first one to come back this time. I'm sure you're a good person, but I'm sorry I can't be here." "You're just going to leave me here?" I shouted. "Julio will come by to give you food. And by the way, don't try to cut that thing out of your arm. This place is covered in cameras. If you do anything suspicious, Julio will see you, and he won't hesitate to stop you." I learned that the hard way. I didn't know what to say, and I stood there in shock as I watched Jack walk over to my car and get in it, starting the engine and disappearing down the street. I finally shut the front door and locked it, turning back to face the empty house. I glanced at my phone, which was still on the couch, and remembered what Jack said before he left. I walked over, trying not to move my arm too much as I picked it up and turned it on. My Tinder profile was open, only it had been changed, and now my profile bio read, "Looking for a sugar baby. $700 weekly, no sex." On the table next to it, there was a list of house-sitting rules, similar to the ones that I had found on the day that I had been here. At the bottom of the page, there was a lime green sticky note that read, "Sorry, I hope you're able to get out soon. Don't worry, maybe you won't be here for long. They almost always forget one of the rules. Good luck, Jack."